Alright, so this video is meant to help conceptualize what the modes are. It's like a first step. It's a way to conceptualize it. I'm not trying to teach you like exactly the modal intervals and everything. I'm just trying to conceptualize it for you. There's 7 modes, okay? So if you know the major scale, let's say C major. That was 2 octaves. That's a C major scale, right? So I'm gonna get my guitar pick out. That's a mode. It's called the Ionian mode. And we know the relative minor is, we can go back to the pentatonic shape for A minor or C major. But we know the relative minor is A minor. And that's called the Aeolian mode. So if you know the relative minor and major, then you already know 2 modes. And Aeolian in that shape that the first shape is. We start on A, right? So if you're somebody who's very curious, if you know the major scale and you know the relative minor and you're a curious person, you have probably already know the modes. I mean, it's in your grasp, it's in your fingers. Basically, you're starting on different notes and ending on different notes. So it's the same concept with relative majors and minors as far as the other modes are concerned. It's the exact same concept. And so there's 5 more modes. You know the major, you know the minor. The major sounds like this. We're in C, so no sharps or flat. It's 1 octave. And we know the A is. Okay, so we already know the Ionian for C. We know C Ionian, which is major, and we know A Aeolian, which is minor. Okay, and we have all the 5 other modes in here. We just start on a different mode. So this is a good way to conceptualize the modes, but you know, I'm not teaching you the intervallic structure. Like in prior videos, I talked about the specific intervallic structure for the major scale. That's the Ionian mode, and also for the minor scale. There's also differing intervallic structures for each of these, and you can easily figure them out because they're in the actual major scale. That's why most teachers and most people say when you're learning any kind of theory or whatever, you should start with a major scale. That is the backbone, the blueprint, the foundational structure for everything. So we can do what's called D-Dorian, right? If we play the C major scale, we know the next note is a D, right? So let's start with the D instead of the C and land on this note. So that is D-Dorian in the C major, okay? So that is the D-Dorian mode. We just covered 1 out of the 4 other modes. Now, this is important to keep in mind. These are all relatives or within the C major scale. However, if you want to learn C Dorian or C Phrygian or C Mixolydian, it's a completely different scale. It's not the scale here. If you just use the C major scale, you're able to access D Dorian, E Phrygian, I think, yeah, E Phrygian, F Lydian, and G Mixolydian, Aeolian, and B Locrian, basically. So you're just starting on different notes and ending on the octave within the same shape pattern. Right? So we did D Dorian. We're doing 8 notes because we want to land on the octave. It sounds better instead of 7. But just remember, every one of these scales has 7 notes instead of 8. But we want to get the octave in there, so we use the 0 and then we use the octave. So that's D Dorian, right? If we want to keep going, we can do E Phrygian, which is. Right, that's E Phrygian. And we can move on to F Lydian, which is, so we have C, D, E, F. That's F Lydian. We move on to G Mixolydian. So C, D, E, F, G. So we start with G, So that is G Mixolydian, and then we can do A Aeolian, which we've already covered, which we start here. That's A Aeolian, and Aeolian means minor, and again Ionian means major, and then the last one is B Locrian, so we go all the way to B, which is this note behind. But we can start there, or we can just use our C and count forward. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So the B Lydian sounds, or I'm sorry, the B Locrian sounds like this. Right? So that is the B Locrian. So I hope that's helpful, at least a little bit. So basically the point is, if you know the C major scale, I know modes are kind of tough and kind of daunting for a lot of people. It's like, oh shit, now I have to learn seven different scales. Technically, yes, you do have to learn 7 different scales, but the easy part is, if you know the major and minor, which is the Ionian and the Aeolian, you already know 2 of the 5 modes, so you only need to know 5 more. And the other cool thing is, it's the same concept as relative major and minors in the key of C, or in any other key. Right? You know, if you're in G major, you're in G Ionian, and you're in E Aeolian. Okay, so there it is. In the C major scale, we have D Dorian, E Phrygian, F Lydian, G Mixolydian, A Aeolian, and B Locrian. And the root C is Ionian. And I hope that's helpful. Some of the modes sound better over a major progression. Some of the modes sound better over a minor progression or chord or what have you. And you can get much deeper into modes and deeper into non-diatonic chords. The rabbit hole goes a lot deeper, right? And again, if you want to stay in the same key and access the modes, you have to know the intervallic structure of whole step, half step, whole step, half step. You know, there's a formula, right? We went over the major and minor ones. I'm not going to go over all 5 for the modes, but you basically have it right here. So if you wanted to do that practically, you can just do your D Dorian and count how many half steps you have. Stay in C major and do D Dorian. When you start on D and you end on D, you count the half steps, and then you write an intervallic formula for it. And using that intervallic formula, it will allow you to access Dorian for any note. You can do C Dorian, you can do A Dorian, you just start on A, start on C. Okay, this is kind of a conceptual way to understand what the modes actually are, and just try to show that they're not as difficult or as daunting as people think. They're the same thing as relative minors and majors, right? It's exactly the same, just different intervallic formulas starting on different notes. And again, caveat, you know, if we're staying in the C major scale, we can only access D Dorian and G Mixolydian and B Locrian, etc. We cannot access C Dorian. We cannot access C Mixolydian, C Locrian, or even C Aeolian, which is C minor. You have to do a different intervallic formula if you want to do C minor, right? C minor would sound like this, right? So it's a different intervallic formula. So you do have to learn the intervallic formulas. This video is just to show you that if you know the major scale and you know the relative minor, then the modes are almost exactly the same, basically exactly the same. When you're starting to learn it, that's a good understanding to have. Of course, it gets much more complex and complicated when you're doing chord progressions and employing these modal harmonies in there. But yeah, I hope that was helpful.